Under the sweltering sun of Moyo village, Nandi stood at the family gathering, her head lowered as her in-laws' whispers pierced her like knives. "She's useless. A woman without children is nothing," they jeered. But as two little hands suddenly grabbed her skirt and called her mama, the entire courtyard froze. Because the twins were not just children, they were the heirs everyone thought she'd never have. Nandi was a gentle woman from Moyo village, always kind to everyone, but her life was full of pain. For 8 long years, she had been married, but no child came. And because of this, people around her treated her like she was nothing. At every family gathering, her sister-in-laws would whisper behind her back. Even the elders, who should have shown her kindness, would shake their heads and say cruel things like, "A barren tree gives no shade." These words cut through Nandi's heart like a knife, but she never answered them. She just lowered her head and stayed quiet, swallowing her tears in silence. But the worst pain didn't come from outsiders. It came from her own husband, Cabello. In the early years of their marriage, Cabello used to hold her hand and promise that they would face everything together. But as the years passed with no baby cries in their home, Cabello changed. He started to come home late, avoiding her eyes. When their relatives mocked Nandi, Cabello stayed silent. Sometimes he even looked at her with anger, as if she was the reason for their sadness. The love that once lived between them was now cold and distant. Nandi could feel the space between them growing bigger every day. No matter how hard she tried to make their home warm and happy, nothing was ever enough. People in the village started calling her names, and even children pointed fingers at her. Nandi's heart grew heavier, but she still smiled in public, hiding her pain deep inside. Yet every night, she cried alone, asking God why she was the only woman who couldn't give birth. She felt trapped in a world where everyone saw her as a failure, even the man who once loved her. The day of Grandmother Yara's birthday was supposed to be a happy day. Nandi woke up early, her hands busy finishing a special gift, a beautiful shawl she had spent weeks weaving with love. She hoped that maybe, just maybe, this small act would make her feel like part of the family again. She wrapped the shawl carefully and dressed in her best clothes, even though her heart was heavy. As she walked to the family compound, she could already hear the laughter and chatter of her in-laws. Everyone was there, eating, dancing, and celebrating. Nandi smiled softly and stepped forward, holding out the shawl to Grandmother Yara with both hands. But before Grandmother Yara could even touch it, Aunt Lindiwe's loud voice cut through the air like a knife. She laughed, pointing at Nandi. "Ah, Nandi, keep your shawl. Next time, bring children instead." The whole courtyard burst into laughter. Some people covered their mouths to hide their smiles, but their eyes sparkled with wicked joy. Nandi felt like the ground had opened under her feet. Her face burned with shame, and her hands trembled. But the real pain came when she turned her head, looking for Cabello, her husband, the man who once promised to protect her. He stood there, quiet, eyes on the ground. He said nothing. No word to stop the insult, no word to stand by her side. He just let it happen. At that moment, something inside Nandi shattered. It wasn't just the insult. It was Cabello's silence that broke her heart completely. She forced herself to stay until the party ended, pretending she was fine. But inside, she was dying. When they got home, Nandi locked herself in their small bedroom and cried until her voice was gone. Her tears soaked her pillow, and her chest ached like it would burst. She thought about all the years she had tried, all the herbs she had drunk, all the prayers she had whispered, and still, she was treated like dirt. That night, as the moonlight streamed through the thin curtains, Nandi sat up, her eyes swollen but burning with a new fire. She realized she couldn't live like this anymore, waiting, hoping, and letting people crush her spirit. No more. If life wouldn't give her children in the way people expected, then she would find her own way, a way that didn't depend on anyone's approval. That night, Nandi made a silent vow. She would change her story. She didn't know how yet, but deep in her heart, a strong voice whispered, "Enough is enough." And for the first time in years, even though her cheeks were wet with tears, Nandi felt a small spark of strength rise inside her, a strength that would soon shake everyone who ever called her a failure. One early morning, while the village was still sleeping, Nandi quietly packed a small bag and slipped out of her house. Her heart was beating fast, but she knew she had to do this. She had heard whispers in the market about twins who were abandoned at Mthunjeni orphanage in Ngoma town. a place far from Moyo village where no one knew her story. Nandi didn't tell anyone, not even Cabello. She took a long, dusty bus ride, her mind full of thoughts and her hands tightly clutching the small savings she had hidden away. When she reached the orphanage, the gates looked old and the walls were faded, but inside there was the sound of children laughing and crying. A kind woman with a warm smile, Sister Thandi, welcomed her. Nandi felt nervous and almost turned back, but something stronger pushed her forward. She told Sister Thandi she wanted to meet the twins. The sister's eyes softened, and she led Nandi through a small hallway into a quiet room. There, lying in simple cots, were the babies, Ayo and Ama. They were so small, their faces thin, and their eyes big and searching. Nandi's heart squeezed tight as soon as she saw them. It was like the world paused, and only the tiny sounds of their breathing filled the room. Ayo reached out his little hand, and without thinking, Nandi stepped closer. Ama blinked up at her, her lips curling into the smallest smile. In that instant, something deep inside Nandi woke up. A warm, powerful feeling she hadn't felt in years flooded her chest. Tears filled her eyes. But this time, they weren't from pain. They were from a new kind of hope. Sister Thandi watched quietly and said, "They've been waiting for someone to love them." Nandi couldn't speak, but in her heart she already knew. These children were meant for her. The bond was instant, like they had always been connected, even before they met. As she gently touched their tiny fingers, Nandi felt that spark, the same spark that had died long ago, come alive again. And in that moment she silently promised them she would fight for them, no matter what it took. When Nandi decided she wanted to adopt Ayo and Ama, she thought it would be simple. But very soon, she learned that the road was hard and full of troubles. First, the papers she had to sign were so many that it made her head spin. Every time she thought she was done, they brought another form to fill. The rules were strict, and the officers asked hard questions. They wanted proof of her money, her home, and even her marriage. It was not easy, but Nandi told herself she would not give up. The hardest pain came from her own husband, Cabello. When Nandi told him about the twins, hoping he would feel the same love, he looked at her with cold eyes. "I want my own blood, Nandi," he said sharply, "not someone else's children." His words cut deep into her heart. She begged him to understand, but Cabello turned away. Night after night, Nandi cried in silence, but each morning she wiped her tears and kept going. She knew in her heart that those twins needed her, and she could not leave them. Even in the village, people started to talk. At the market, women whispered as she passed. "Why is she taking another woman's curse?" they said. "She is desperate now." Nandi heard every word, but she kept her head high. She knew they did not understand, and she refused to let their poison enter her heart. Money became another heavy stone on her shoulders. The adoption cost more than she had. So, Nandi made a brave choice. She took her gold earrings, her wedding necklace, and the little silver bangles her mother had given her, and she sold them all in Goma town. Each item she let go felt like a piece of her past breaking away. But she didn't stop there. She started working extra hours at the village clinic, cleaning and helping late into the night. Her body ached and her feet swelled, but she kept smiling because every coin she earned brought her closer to her dream. Through all this, Nandi stayed quiet but strong. No one saw the battles she was fighting, but deep inside, she promised herself, no matter how hard it gets, she would not stop until Ayo and Ama were safe in her arms forever. The day finally came. After months of tears, struggle, and sleepless nights, Nandi stood at the gate of Mthunjini orphanage with papers in her hand and joy in her heart. The twins, Ayo and Ama, were bundled up in soft blankets. Their big eyes looked at Nandi with trust, as if they already knew she was their mother. Her hands trembled as she carried them, but her heart felt light for the first time in years. She whispered, "We are going home, my baby." The sky seemed brighter that day, and even the wind felt like it was singing with her. When she reached home, Nandi hoped for a miracle, that Cabello would smile, open his arms, and welcome the children. But as she stepped inside, Cabello sat in his chair, his face hard like stone. He glanced at the babies and then looked away, saying nothing. His silence was louder than any shout. Nandi's heart sank, but she hugged Ayo and Ama tighter. She said softly, "You are safe now. Mama is here." The news spread quickly through Moyo village. People gathered outside her gate, whispering and pointing. Her in-laws arrived, faces twisted with anger and mockery. Aunt Lindaiwe, the same woman who once shamed her, sneered and said, "So, you brought children now? To cover your shame? You think this makes you a real woman?" The words stung, but Nandi stood tall. She kissed the twins' foreheads and said nothing back. Inside her, a fire burned. She knew her worth, and no insult could put out that flame. Day after day, the mocking continued. Even Cabello refused to hold the babies. He avoided them, acting like they were invisible. At night, Nandi would sing lullabies to Ayo and Amma while tears rolled down her cheeks. But every time they smiled at her, her pain melted. Their tiny hands gripped her fingers, and in that touch, she found strength. She told herself, "No one can take this love away from me." Neighbors watched as Nandi moved around with the twins, feeding them, bathing them, and rocking them to sleep, all by herself. Some laughed, some shook their heads, but a few began to see her strength. Slowly, whispers turned into silent respect, though no one said it out loud yet. Through it all, Nandi's spirit did not break. Her body was tired, her heart bruised, but her soul stayed strong. She had fought too hard to give up now. Every time the twins called out softly, every time they smiled, Nandi knew this was her purpose. She was no longer just the woman they mocked. She was a mother, and no one, not even her cold husband or cruel in-laws, could change that truth. Weeks passed, and Nandi kept caring for Ayo and Amma with all her heart. She took them for a routine checkup at the clinic in Ngoma town, just to make sure they were healthy. The doctor, an old family friend, smiled at the babies and then looked closely at Ayo's birthmark, a small, star-shaped mark on his shoulder. His smile faded, and he asked Nandi if anyone in her husband's family had such a mark. Nandi blinked, confused. She remembered hearing stories about Cabello's late father, who had the exact same rare mark. The doctor ordered some tests, just to be sure. Days later, the results came back. The twins shared a rare genetic trait that only appeared in Cabello's bloodline. The truth hit like lightning. These babies were not strangers. They were Cabello's own blood relatives, abandoned by his cousin during a family scandal no one wanted to talk about. That cousin had disappeared months ago, leaving the twins at the orphanage door, hoping no one would ever find out. The news spread through Moyo village faster than wildfire. People who once mocked Nandi were now whispering in shock. "Did you hear? Those twins are from Cabello's own family. They carry the same mark as the old man, Cabello's father." The same mouths that had called Nandi barren now couldn't stop talking about the miracle. Even Aunt Lindiwe, who had once sneered at Nandi, was stunned. She couldn't find words. The in-laws who had laughed at Nandi now lowered their heads in shame. Neighbors who had looked at her with pity began to see her differently. The woman they had mocked for years had unknowingly saved her own family's children. At home, Cabello stood frozen when he heard the news. His face turned pale. For the first time, he looked at Ayo and Amma properly, seeing the truth in their eyes. They were his blood. They were his family. The cold wall he had built around his heart began to crack. Nandi, standing quietly with the twins in her arms, felt no anger. She only felt peace. All the pain, all the insults, all the nights she had cried, it all led to this moment. The babies she had fought so hard for were not just hers by love, but also by blood. And now, the whole village knew. The woman they had called barren was the one who brought her family's lost children home. The day of the family gathering came, and Nandi walked in quietly, just like she always did. But this time, things felt different. The same relatives who used to laugh at her were now stealing glances, whispering among themselves. Some avoided her eyes, others faked small smiles. The air was thick with tension and curiosity. Cabello sat in the corner, his face serious, still trying to process everything that had come to light. Then, suddenly, Baba Masego, the respected elder of the village, stood up. The room fell silent. Everyone knew when Baba Masego spoke, his words carried weight. He cleared his throat and looked around at all the faces. Then he said, loud and clear, "These twins, Ayo and Amma, are the rightful heirs of this family. They carry the blood of our ancestors. Let no one here forget that." Gasps filled the room. People looked at each other in shock. The same aunties who once called the twins bought children now blinked in silence. The uncles who had mocked Nandi lowered their heads. The whispers stopped. All eyes slowly turned toward Nandi, who stood frozen, her heart pounding. Just then, Ayo and Ama, playing nearby, heard Baba Masego's words. They turned, their little faces lighting up when they saw Nandi. Without thinking, they ran across the room, their small feet pattering against the floor. They leaped into Nandi's arms, laughing and shouting, "Mama! Mama!" Their sweet voices echoed through the hall, louder than any insult that had ever been thrown at her. Nandi's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. She hugged the twins tightly as everyone watched, speechless. In that moment, everything flipped. The woman they once called barren was now the mother of the family's heirs. The shame they had tried to throw at her turned into honor. The same people who had pushed her aside now looked at her with new respect, and some with quiet guilt. Nandi stood tall, holding her children close, her heart finally full. The whole village saw it. The whole family felt it. A new chapter had begun. The news had barely settled when Nandi saw something she never thought she would witness. The same in-laws who once mocked her so cruelly were now approaching her with bowed heads and shaky voices. Aunt Lindiwe, the loudest of them all, the one who once laughed at her and called her barren in front of everyone, was now on her knees. Her eyes, once sharp with insults, were now soft with tears. "Nandi, please forgive me," she whispered. "Let me carry the twins, just once. Let me hold them." But little Ama, feeling the strange hands reaching out, tightened her tiny arms around Nandi's neck. She buried her face in Nandi's shoulder and shook her head. She didn't want anyone else, only her mama. The room grew quiet again, and people watched as Aunt Lindiwe's hands dropped to her sides, rejected by the child she once called a curse. The shame on her face was clear for everyone to see. Then Cabello, who had been standing at the back, suddenly stepped forward. His eyes were red, his face pale. For months, he had blamed Nandi, turned away from her love, and refused to see the pain she carried. Now, watching the twins call her mama and seeing the family beg her, the truth hit him like a storm. His knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, crying openly in front of everyone. His strong shoulders shook with sobs. "Nandi, I was blind," he choked out. "I let you suffer alone. I see now. I see your heart. Please forgive me." Nandi looked at him, her own eyes wet, but she stayed strong. Her hands stroked Ayo and Ama's backs as they clung to her. All around, the relatives who once called her barren now pleaded to be part of her joy. They wanted to carry the twins, to touch them, to erase their shame. But Ama and Ayo stayed close, only trusting the woman who fought for them, the woman who loved them before anyone else did. The power in that moment was clear. Nandi, once mocked, was now the center. The one they laughed at was the one they now begged. And as Cabello wept, truly seeing his wife's strength for the first time, the whole village knew Nandi's heart had won. Nandi stood there, her arms wrapped around Ayo and Ama, as everyone watched in silence. Her eyes were full of tears, but her voice was calm and strong like never before. She looked at all the faces, the same faces that once whispered behind her back and called her name. She took a deep breath and said, "Motherhood is not only in the womb, it is in the heart. A heart that never gives up no matter how much pain it feels." Her words hung in the air, and no one dared to speak. Even the wind seemed to pause to listen. Nandi's tears rolled down her cheeks, but she kept speaking, her voice steady and proud. "You called me barren. You laughed at me. You made me feel small. But today, I stand here with my children, not by blood, but by love. And love is stronger than blood." Aunt Lindiwe, still on her knees, lowered her head in shame. Cabello, still crying, could not even lift his face. Nandi looked at them and said softly, "I forgive you, all of you, but listen to me well. Never again will I lower my head in this family. Never again will you make me feel less." There was a deep silence. Then, slowly, someone in the courtyard started clapping. It was Baba Masego, the elder who first announced the twins as rightful heirs. His hands clapped slowly but with force. Then another person joined, and another. Soon, the whole courtyard was filled with loud clapping. But this time, it was not mockery. It was respect, deep, real respect for the woman they had once laughed at. Even the children playing nearby stopped and looked at Nandi with wide eyes, as if seeing her for the first time. Her head was high, her back straight, and her heart shining through her words. She had turned her pain into power. And the whole village knew Nandi was no longer the woman they could mock. She was now the woman they would honor. And as the applause grew louder, Nandi hugged her twins even tighter, knowing that her fight was worth every tear. The village of Moyo came alive with joy. The air was filled with the sounds of drums, laughter, and the smell of delicious food as the entire community gathered for a grand feast in honor of Nandi and her twins. The long tables were covered with plates of steaming rice, chicken, and vegetables, and everyone danced in celebration. Nandi stood at the center of it all, her heart overflowing with pride as Ayo and Amma played at her feet. For the first time in years, Nandi felt truly seen. The people who once ridiculed her now praised her strength and courage. Baba Masego, the village elder, stood and raised a glass in her honor. "To Nandi," he said, his voice full of warmth and respect. "The woman who showed us all that motherhood is not about what you give birth to, but what you nurture with love and dedication." Kabalo, standing beside Nandi, looked at her with a deep sense of regret and admiration. He had once doubted her. He had let his pride and shame cloud his love for her. But now, seeing her in the light of this celebration, he understood. He looked into her eyes and with sincerity vowed, "I will stand by you, Nandi. I will be the husband you deserve. I will be the father Ayo and Amma need." His words were simple, but they held so much meaning. As the night went on, Nandi sat on the edge of the celebration, watching Ayo and Amma play with the other children. Her heart was full, not just with love for her twins, but with a sense of peace she had never known before. She had been through so much pain, so many tears, and yet here she was, stronger than ever. Her smile radiated strength, the kind of strength that only comes from knowing who you are and what you've overcome. The woman who was once called a failure for not having children was now the heartbeat of this family, the foundation they would all build their future on. Nandi looked at her twins, their laughter filling the air, and for the first time, she didn't feel the weight of the past. She was no longer the woman defined by other people's opinions. She was the woman who had chosen her own path, the woman who had fought for love and family. And in that moment, she knew this was just the beginning of her new life.